وقال الذين كفروا أئذا كنا ترابا وآباؤنا أئنا لمخرجون لقد وعدنا هذا نحن وآباؤنا من قبل إن هذا إلا أساطير الأولين قل سيروا في الأرض فانظروا كيف كان عاقبة المجرمين قل سيروا في الأرض فانظروا كيف كان عاقبة المجرمين ولا تحزن عليهم ولا تكن في ضيق مما يمكرون ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين قل عسى أن يكون ردف لكم بعض الذي تستعجلون وإن ربك لذو فضل على الناس ولكن أكثرهم لا يشكرون وإن ربك لذو فضل على الناس ولكن أكثرهم لا يشكرون وإن ربك ليعلم ما تكن صدورهم وما يعلنون وما من غائبة في السماء والأرض إلا في كتاب مبين.
So the disbelievers say, "What? When we and our forefathers have become dust, shall we be brought back to life again? We have heard such promises before, and so did our forefathers. They're just ancient fables. Say, travel through the earth and see how the evildoers ended up. Do not grieve over them. Do not be distressed by their schemes." They also say, "When will this promise be fulfilled if what you say is true?" Say, "Maybe some of what you seek to hasten is near at hand. Your Lord is bountiful to people, though most of them are ungrateful. He knows everything their hearts conceal and everything they reveal. There is nothing hidden in the heavens or on earth that is not in a clear record." So, like I was saying initially, this surah has a lot of talking. In Abdul Halim translates it as talking to Prophet Muhammad, but I'm more partial to believe that it's actually speaking to future believers as well, because like I said before, the Qur'an is a universal book, and it's meant not just for the Prophet ﷺ and the kuffar, but for everyone after him as well. So one of the verses that stuck with me, and I'm sure it stuck with many of you as well, is when the disbelievers taunt the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and they ask, "When will this promise be fulfilled if what you say is true?" And the promise that they're referring to here, of course, is nothing less than the Day of Judgment. And there's been a lot of controversy about the Day of Judgment in the Kuffar's time. The very first, or one of the first incidences that happened in Mecca was that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ climbed up to a tall hill in Mecca, and he started to call for the people of Quraysh to come and gather around. And once they had all gathered around, he asked them various different questions about his character, such as, "Oh, people of Quraysh, if I asked you whether you believe me if there was an army coming to attack Mecca from the distance, beyond from what you can see, like you can look at the horizon and they're not even there, would you believe me?" And the Quraysh go, "Of course, Muhammad, you are, the most truthful and someone with the most upright character that we'll ever know. So if you tell us that there's an army coming, we'll believe it." And then the Prophet ﷺ, I'm having difficulty remembering the exact wording, but the Prophet ﷺ goes on to ask, "If there was an imminent danger from this army, would you believe me as well, even though you can't see them?" And they go, "Of course, we would believe you." And then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ tells them, "Then I tell you to believe me when I say that the day of judgment, which is closer than anything you could have even suspected, and that punishment is coming even quicker, even though you can't see it. And it was a subtle way to kind of convince the Quraysh that he's the truthful, he's not someone who would lie, and even though they can't see this danger, it's still present. But of course, the people of Quraysh, most of them don't take it seriously, and they laugh it off, and still very few join him. So they ask him again in this surah, when will this promise be fulfilled if what you say is true? And this is a recurring thing. They keep asking him that same question. And of course, Prophet Muhammad doesn't know this. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows when the day of judgment will happen. And as far as I know, there is no hadith that talks about when the day of judgment will actually happen. But there are signs of the day of judgment. And this is, to me, what the Quranic verse is referencing when it goes in the 72nd verse. Maybe some of what you seek to hasten is near at hand. There are different interpretations of this ayat. Some people say this is not referring to how close the day of judgment is, but rather how close punishment is for these people. In which case, the punishment for these people is closer at hand, just like the day of judgment punishment is closer than people suspect. But my own tadabbur, when I was reflecting on this verse, when I was reading it, was that when the Prophet Muhammad, or when the disbelievers taunted the Prophet Muhammad, the Quranic verse is responding to him saying, perhaps it's closer at hand than you think. And we know the first sign of the Day of Judgment was the Prophet Muhammad passing away, or that was one of the beginning signs of the Day of Judgment, I should say. So that's been about 1,500 years now, and if it was close then, imagine how closer it is now. We can see signs of that happening all throughout the world. Of course, people have earthquakes on their mind right now because of what happened in Turkey and Syria, but there's many different other things that can happen. We can have that discussion later too if you'd like. But subhanAllah, the next verse isn't talking about fear. The next verse is Allah subhanahu speaking and saying, your Lord is bountiful to people, as in he's reminding them to not just be full of despair and not hope for the best, because at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, as Bridges translation does it, the possessor of grace towards mankind, even though most of them end up being ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The final two verses being another reflection again, and we saw that earlier in this surah as well, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything that's hidden in the heavens and the earth, and he knows what's hidden within people as well. The only final verse I want to talk about, and it's kind of related, but it's about the disbelievers in the past and what happened to them, because again, that was the theme in the beginning part of the surah too, right? We had the people of Lot, we had the people of Queen Sheba, and what would have happened to them if Sulaiman alayhi salam had sent his armies upon them. And this Quranic verse is reminding us again that if we are really in doubt, we can travel throughout the earth and see how the evildoers end up. Just don't be, sad over them, don't grieve over them, and don't be distressed by what you see. And there's a lot of different speculation over where these cities are now. Some say Petra is one city, perhaps the city of Thamud, city of Ad. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. You can't see Sodom anymore, but like the Bible says, I think the Dead Sea or around that area is where Sodom is, a place where nothing grows. So if you really want, if you put some stock into some of these stories where, there's no verification, but there's still some available places you can travel to. And there's a hadith, and I mentioned this last week, that the Prophet ﷺ was traveling and he came across the ruins of a people that long time ago had incurred the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he said, let's just keep traveling through, let's not stay here unless we suffer the same fate. So there's a lot of lessons to be derived in real life and from the surah as well, and specifically about what awaits us when the day of judgment comes, and what awaits people that persist in disbelief and don't repent towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I think I'll end my little spiel here and open the floor to any more discussions, thoughts, and questions that you might have.
So, when you were talking about when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like he was traveling and then he came to a place and he was just like, let's not stay here because it was of like bad people who had been ruined. What if like as a believer you don't know and you accidentally end up settling there? Like, what do? I guess like it would be leave, but like if you don't know, then like are there any ways to know? apart from like the obvious ones that are like literal desolate locations.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's hard to tell for, I guess, some smaller civilizations whether or not you're actually encroaching on their territory. Like, for example, let's take a really old civilization, the people of Nuh alayhi salam. Nuh alayhi salam civilization was flooded, and people, if that had happened closer to the Prophet Prophet's time, like within a few centuries, I'm sure that we could still see ruins and not settle there. But since this happened thousands of years ago, it's pretty unrealistic to expect no one to have settled wherever Nuh alayhi salam civilization was. So I think that there comes a point where once there's no trace of any civilization there, like for example, let's say in 1,000 years, if we're still here, Petra is completely gone. It's just sandy hills, and you could settle there and just you will have no knowledge one way or another that Petra was even there if there's no one preserving it, and the land itself may not be cursed. Like again with Sodom. Only the Bible says that that land is cursed. The Quran and the Hadith, as far as I know, don't say the same thing. The people there were cursed for sure. And if you were around anything that reminds you of the people, for example, I'm using Petra again. Let's say Petra's had the ruins were still standing, and you knew that this was some civilization that had been destroyed and no one lived there anymore, then it would be pretty bad to stay there from a religious standpoint because they were, a civilization that had been destroyed and now there's no trace of them. Like, why is there no one living in Petra anymore? The ruins that the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came through. This, I mean, okay, give me a second. I can kind of recall. They were going through the valley. It was like near this place called Mina, or you know, okay. I'm really testing my knowledge here, but they were going through a valley of this place on their way to wherever city, and when they went through that valley, there were actual ruins that the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam could see and his companions could see. And because he had been given divine knowledge, he knew that there were people that had been destroyed beforehand. And I'm pretty sure some tafsirs will say like this was a people like Abraha went through when he was about to attack Mecca on the year that the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was born. But in any case, whatever the tafsirs say, it was a place that the Prophet ﷺ didn't want to stay too long in because it reminded him of the punishments and he didn't want to suffer, he would not have suffered the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he didn't want to, as we say, tempt fate or just stay there for no reason when there are better places to stay. So to answer your question, if there are, clear identifiable signs of a ruined civilization, and you can have some knowledge that perhaps this civilization was destroyed for some heretical belief, don't stay there. But if you are just seeing some ruins that aren't preserved, you have no idea where they're from, then it's not necessarily going to be sinful on you to stay there if you're not sure. You're never punished for ignorance. And if you go to a place of ruin and there's nothing in your mind that tells you, oh yeah, this clearly the civilization was ruined because God had some fury against them. Staying there again. This is a big hypothetical. No one really stays in ruins anymore, but again, you wouldn't be sinful. It wouldn't be problematic in that sense. Petra is a city in Jordan that had like places that were carved out of rocks and into the mountains, basically. And scientists still don't know what really caused people to evacuate and leave that civilization, or if they were all destroyed. I think the last one I saw was like some kind of flood. So, or supply routes are cut off. So that was another theory that people just moved because no one was coming to them giving them supplies. So, yeah.
Okay. And I forgot my other question, so I am going to mute myself and hope someone else asks the question that will maybe jog my memory. So yeah.
Okay. All right. I guess I should add a clarification that if you are visiting a place to learn about it, you're not really falling under the same umbrella, because this is what the Quranic ayat says, right? We just reviewed the Quranic ayat that says if you want to learn from past mistakes, you can journey through the earth and look what their outcome was. So people that want to visit Petra as a civilization, tourist trap and all, you can go and visit. And if you want to learn about it and maybe see what link they have to, Quranic ayat, Hadith, etc., you can try, even though there's not like an explicit link. But you wouldn't be sinful for making the journey just to learn more about it. So that doesn't fall under like the same umbrella as traveling to specifically stay in a ruined civilization. I guess it's kind of fun to think about different cataclysms and whether or not they were caused by, Allah Subhanahu being angry at people, like Pompeii, for example. That has no religious significance. It was all the way in Italy, as far as we know, like no religious significance. All the way in Italy, like if it was, whatever religion was happening around that time, I'm sure there was some monotheistic, Abrahamic linked religion there at that time. Was it caused by people's disobedience in Allah Subhanahu wa Taala? Maybe. There's also natural disasters that can happen, so. Right. I wouldn't recommend staying there overnight. Travel like a couple more miles and, I don't know, take a boat to mainland Italy.
So I came in a little late. I guess this is just another question. Like you kind of touched on it. Like there's no way, there's not necessarily a way to concretely know, like, hey, this is a ruined civilization unless it's explicitly stated somewhere. That requires extensive knowledge of religion from someone, and we're not all there. We're not all there, and if you are, mashallah. But for the people that aren't there and they might just be somewhere and they're just like, oh, this might seem like a nice spot to just chill for a second. Well, I guess like maybe they'd have a gut feeling like, this isn't right. So I guess I rescind my question.
I mean, you could have a gut feeling, but a gut feeling doesn't necessarily mean anything. If there's no explicit thing and you're like, oh, I'm going to stay here the night and you don't know anything, I find it very hard to believe that you'd be punished for that because it's ignorance. You don't know any better. Even if you have that gut feeling, like people get gut feelings all the time. You go out at night, I'm sure you get a gut feeling of something bad will happen. So, I mean, it's very hard to say, but and I feel like it's a ruling now that was really only best used when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was around because he had, again, divine knowledge. Now we're left with these ruins. Some Sahaba have reported that, again, like the ruins I was talking about, that Hadith, don't go there and don't stay the night there. But let's say we took the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to Petra, he would definitely have more knowledge about it. He'd be like, oh yeah, don't stay because such and such people, that's who they were. Or we take the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ all the way up to Jerusalem and hear what he has to say about the Dead Sea, or some areas around there, and just be like, oh yeah, don't stay there because XYZ people were there. We don't really know anymore. So it's a very small niche kind of ruling, and that only applies to like a few areas.
I just want to comment because I've done a lot of traveling in my life. When you go to one of these places, whether or not it's religiously prohibited for you to stay there because something bad will happen, if you think about or consider staying in a place and you get a bad vibe, you're not going to stay there.
It's true.
Some
That
of these
is true.
places literally scream that, and then you just keep going.
Very, very true. Unless you have no common sense and you stay there because you booked a hotel or something.
Yeah. On that note, has anybody ever stayed in a place or been through a place where they're like, absolutely no, I'm not staying here whatsoever?
I can't say stayed at a place, but my friends were just like, let's do a cabin in the woods last year. And I said, absolutely not, paid my part, and then went to ICNA instead because it felt very wrong to be in a cabin in the woods. Not necessarily religiously inclined. I think it was just like my African American senses tingling, like my African American spidey senses. But like, yeah, I don't do cabin in the woods. They did not have service. Luckily, everyone was safe, but it was a no for me.
I can't think of a place I had a bad feeling of yet. So
There's actually a lot of places like that out in the California desert. And when you ride through them, you know, absolutely no. Keep going.
I feel like it's even harder when you're on a motorbike. Like you're open to the environment.
There's that. It's even easier to notice when a place has an off vibe.
I did stay, like when I went to visit Petra, I stayed like a mile away in like one of the hotels, and I didn't get a bad feeling. But when I was in Petra, I was just thinking so much like, oh, who are these people? Like, what happened to them? Blah blah blah. And then at some point, I think it was past the main, what do they call it? The main facade of the the underground buildings or the mountainous buildings, I was like, I've gone far enough. I'm gonna go back now. I've seen all I wanted to see. But it wasn't really a feeling. It was just maybe my own. It could have been my own laziness talking to. I just wanted to go back.
Didn't get a vibe that the whole place was like cursed. Like, man, this is a cursed place. I can't be here.
I did not get that vibe. You know, I don't really get those vibes. Sadly, I mean, some of them are like just like they're like holes bored into the walls of the mountain, and you just look into them. And you're like, yeah. I mean, I see other people going into some of these holes, but I'm gonna stay back. You know, I don't really want to go see. So next time
Interesting
I should
experience.
screen share this chat. Honestly, YouTube viewers only are missing out. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and end it here. So, jazakallah khairan to everyone for coming, even though it's been delayed twice. Inshallah, next week we'll have it again on the weekend, unless I forget or sleep or something. All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.